What if the most important truths about life weren't hidden in the future, but in the past? For hundreds of years, the world has changed. Kingdoms rise and fall, and technology moves forward. But the questions we ask stay the same. Who am I? What is worth enduring pain for? Can peace and freedom coexist? Is there meaning inside this short, fragile life? In China, India, and later in Europe, other people had the same sleepless nights and questions that needed answers. And what they found, 5 deep truths about being human, might change how you think about your own life. 5 people, each very different in time and personality, dared to answer, from the dusty scrolls of ancient Athens to the cold study rooms of 19th century Europe. Not with certainty, but with bravery, a contemplative living simply, a visionary exploring depths, a solitary explorer discussing return, and others who, in silence or defiance, help to make what we now call philosophy. This isn't just a story about people who think. It's a trip through 5 truths that aren't set in stone but are felt by everyone. And maybe we remember what we already knew when we hear them again. A man walked alone in the peaceful streets of 19th century Copenhagen, frequently crouched under an umbrella, writing to everyone while speaking to no one. Søren Kierkegaard was his name. He was neither a crowd pleaser nor a professor. He never quite fit in with his surroundings, argued with church leaders, and published under false names. But maybe that was the idea. Kierkegaard ended his engagement to Regine Olsen, the woman he loved, when he was 27 years old. Not because he no longer loved her, but rather because he was afraid of a more serious betrayal, leading a life that wasn't entirely his own. The idea that the self is something we must become rather than something that is finished was his main theme. He observed that most people are buried in roles, traditions, and borrowed beliefs, and thus sleepwalk through life. They steer clear of true freedom because it necessitates something demanding responsibility. He referred to it as the sickness unto death, not actual death, but a quiet despair that is so imperceptible that we are unaware of it, the despair of becoming everyone but ourselves. He then issued a challenge to us, not to rebel, not to get away, but to remain motionless and ask, when the noise subsides, who am I? Which truth am I willing to live by? Not being who you are is the most common form of despair, he wrote. Kierkegaard's bravery was quiet. It was not political. The focus was inward, the kind of bravery that challenges us to make a complete free decision and to live with the consequences of that decision rather than to fit in. He reminds us that being authentic means not just existing, but determining what your existence means in a world that is fixated on performance. There was a man who preferred the gutter over the garden and the streets over the schools in the center of ancient Athens, where philosophers argued in shining robes and temples topped the hills. Diogenes of Sinope was his name. He slept in a big ceramic jar, had no house and no money. He appeared to be a beggar to many. Diogenes, however, believed that the rest of the world had become lost. He believed civilization had devolved into a cage, one that was stifling despite being gilded. People lived by excess, conceit, and unending desire rather than by logic or reality. He therefore did the unimaginable. He reduced life to its most basic elements. He lived with stray dogs, ate with his hands, and questioned people who professed to be wise. When Plato once described a human being as a featherless biped, Diogenes famously responded by bringing a plucked chicken into the academy, exclaiming, "Behold, here is Plato's man." But beneath the showmanship was a deeper idea. That virtue is derived from one's actions rather than one's words. Live in harmony with nature, he advised. That required getting rid of things that weren't necessary, walking through the world without chains, not running away from it. I am a citizen of the world, he said in response to the question of which city he was from. At a time when a person's identity was tied to their polis, this was a revolutionary assertion. His lamp continues to shine today, not in the Athens streets, but rather in the queries we pose after the commotion subsides. What do I actually need? What am I serving? Whose admiration am I seeking? Diogenes didn't pretend in his life. Even though a lot of people made fun of him, some stopped to consider whether he was the only one awake. He was a man without a home, a school, or a long-term companion who spent the majority of his life by himself. Without a shrine, Friedrich Nietzsche wandered Europe like a pilgrim, looking for something that no one could identify. Nietzsche, a gifted student who was once acclaimed as a professor at the age of 24, abandoned academia. He spent his finest years writing in tiny rented rooms far above the world, while contending with chronic illness and loneliness. And a strange, unnerving and timeless truth started to emerge in those pages. Be who you are. What did he mean, though? According to Nietzsche, imitation is encouraged in modern life. We take morals from tradition, beliefs from institutions, and meaning from the masses. According to him, this caused us to become fragmented, shallow, and half-formed individuals. To become who you are was not an exhortation to selfishness, but to struggle, to mold one's life like an artist, even through suffering. He strongly stated that obedience in disguise is often what society refers to as virtue, that we need to abandon herd morality, not with arrogance, but with genuine integrity. He popularized the concept of the Übermensch, which is frequently misinterpreted, not a higher power, but a representation of someone who upholds moral principles and believes in life despite hardship. Later on, political ideologies regrettably misapplied his theories, a distortion Nietzsche would have undoubtedly denounced. Scholars today generally concur that these historically problematic interpretations run contrary to his central philosophical aims. He wasn't a prophet of tyranny. He was a poet of transformation, and even though he was silent in his last years due to a mental breakdown that prevented him from speaking, his words still speak for him. As queries rather than directives, what masks do I wear? What have I created for myself, and what have I borrowed from the outside world? Being who you are is not a destination. It is a commitment that is renewed daily in the ways that we live, fail, and start over. He was a man of paradox, a psychiatrist who listened to dreams, a scientist who studied myth, and a thinker who looked into the ruins of old stories to find the soul of modern man. Carl Gustav Jung, the grandson of a mystic and the son of a pastor, was born in Switzerland in 1875. He would go on to become one of the 20th century's most significant and misinterpreted voices. Working closely with Sigmund Freud, Jung advanced rapidly in the fledgling field of psychology during his early career. However, Jung viewed the unconscious as something more profound, a vast symbolic world that was just waiting to be understood, while Freud saw it as a repository for repressed desires. What Jung referred to as the shadow was one of his most significant and unnerving concepts. The shadow is everything we conceal from ourselves as well as from other people. It encompasses our phobias, inclinations, imperfections, and even unclaimed potential. One becomes enlightened by making the darkness conscious, not by imagining figures of light, he wrote in a contemplative manner. For Jung, confronting the shadow was an act of moral bravery rather than a plunge into evil. If you suppress it, it will take control of you from behind. You can recover what was lost if you face it. This wasn't merely conjecture. Jung observed it in both individuals and entire societies. He thought that when entire cultures are unable to integrate their shadow, many collective crises, including wars, prejudices, and mass hysteria, arise. However, Jung also provided a hopeful route. We can start the gradual process of integration through introspection, art, myth, and open communication. By accepting our imperfections, we can grow more complete. In a society that values appearance over substance, Jung reminds us that true wholeness comes from reconciliation rather than perfection. To be aware of your shadow is not to live in shame. It is to light a lamp and venture into the shadowy recesses of oneself. We try to outrun some truths while chasing others. There aren't many things more challenging or human than this. To live is to suffer. Arthur Schopenhauer was well aware of this. He was born in Germany in the 18th century, a turbulent and conquering time, and he saw life through suffering rather than progress. He held that the will, a blind, limitless force that propels desire, struggle, and ultimately disappointment, is the source of all human striving. We pursue pleasure, status, and love, only to be plagued by our shortcomings. For him, life was a burden to bear, rather than a blessing to be rejoiced in. He maintained that true peace came from less, not more, from a distance, from artwork, out of sympathy. As a student, Friedrich Nietzsche read Schopenhauer's writings, and, for a while, saw a reflection of his own pain in them. However, he would eventually choose a different route. Nietzsche called for affirmation, while Schopenhauer called for resignation. He expressed in poetic terms that suffering is the foundation for change rather than merely a barrier. He said, "He who has a why to live can bear almost any how." He posed the question, what if we accepted adversity instead of merely surviving it? What if we loved fate rather than cursed it? He referred to this as amor fati, or the love of one's fate. Saying yes to all of it, the beauty and the cruelty, the rise and the fall, requires brave agreement rather than passive acceptance. This concept is still challenging. It has drawn criticism for being insensitive and a romanticized cover-up of actual trauma. Nietzsche, however, did not present it as consoling. He presented it as a challenge. Suffering does not equate to failure. It is to live genuinely, to feel profoundly, and, if we have the courage, to develop. From Nietzsche's defiance to Schopenhauer's silence, we keep coming back to the same conclusion. Life is painful. However, there might still be significance in that pain, not given to us, but forged out of our bravery. Though they were not infallible, these thinkers influenced the way we think about the world. Their truths were provocations rather than commands. The broad generalizations in Schopenhauer's pessimism have drawn criticism. Critics ask, given that joy is also indisputable, can suffering be the essence of life? The potent and poetic rhetoric of Nietzsche has frequently been misunderstood. The context was overlooked by some who cited him. His ideas were altered by others to suit risky agendas. Scholars have now widely discredited this distortion, which Nietzsche himself would have denounced. Even Jung has come under fire for his broad theories of archetypes and the collective unconscious. Some claim that his system is more art than science and cannot be tested. What about Diogenes? His extreme disobedience inspired both awe and perplexity. Did he simply protest what he couldn't change, or did he offer a viable path? No one voice has all the answers. However, these philosophers remind us that philosophy is not about certainty through their conflicts, queries, and contradictions. It all comes down to having the guts to face uncertainty. What timeless truths have the great philosophers left behind was the initial question we posed. Not simple solutions, not run away from the burden of life. However, something more profound, the bravery to remain motionless in the midst of chaos, like Kierkegaard, the ability to live simply, as Diogenes did, an exhortation to emulate Nietzsche, like Jung, a mirror to our hidden selves. Additionally, Schopenhauer gave a somber nod to suffering. These men weren't perfect. They did not provide perfect systems either. However, during their agitated hunt, they lit something, a lantern that we still use today. We all endure hardships. Masks are worn by all of us. We all question our true selves. The ability to ask questions is perhaps philosophy's greatest gift. So, when no one else is around, who are you? Beyond the roles, beyond the noise.